Welcome to the Master Your Energy podcast with Harry Massey, where we discuss energy, health, and personal growth with the leading experts in the field. In this mini-series, you'll hear from the speakers of our upcoming Zenergy conference, a symphony of scientists, entrepreneurs, innovators, healers, and musicians coming together to grow the emerging bioenergetics industry this October in Denver, Colorado. Welcome to today's Energy for Life podcast. So we are joined today by William Marsh. He's the head nutritionist and brand ambassador for Premier Research Labs. He's had over 12 years fostering innovation at Premier Research Labs, and he's got a deep-seated love for the natural world and believes that there's an opportunity to grow towards your ideal self. He's got a background in nutritional sciences from the University of Texas at Austin, and Will's passion lies in translating cutting-edge clinical science to real-world results to better nourish the world to a more radiant tomorrow. So welcome, Will. And I guess I'm just going to start with, for our audience, so Premier Research Labs and NES, which is soon to become the Energy for Life company, we've been working together in the background for a year or so on how we could integrate their nutritional products into the software, and also how we could integrate imprinting into some of their nutritional products as well. So with that said, let's just start on a bit of a background of Premier Research Labs, because it's one of the few supplement companies that actually has some energetic principles. And the original founder, Dr. Bob Marshall, he was a big proponent of Chinese medicine, and they used to still do teach. He's dead now, but the company still teaches a form of applied kinesiology to test all their supplements. And I know that you worked out all of your formulations through muscle testing and some of these principles. But why not just give us a little bit of background on Premier Research Labs, and sort of the sort of overall principles behind your formulations. Let's start there.
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for having me here, Harry. I'm excited just to talk about the field of energetics and how that applies to nutrition. I think the NES and Premier partnership that's emerging, and this will be the kind of the first entry into that, is a really exciting advance for health, right? It really starts to speak to the totality of what really health entails. And that really was a mission of Dr. Marshall for over 30 years. Since he founded Premier Research Labs. The founding of the company actually comes from, and I'm not sure if you actually recall it, Harry, but it was the tryptophan poisoning in the 80s. It's called the Shawadinko incident. Do you recall that incident by any chance?
I do remember that tryptophan was banned. Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah, and so essentially it was a dimerized tryptophan contamination that resulted in thousands of people getting sick. It actually, a new disease actually emerged from that tryptophan poisoning called eosinophil syndrome, and that was basically was rare in diagnostic manuals before, and then after that Shawadinko incident, it was popularized because of the contamination. And Dr. Marshall was actually one of the victims of that poor quality effort by the Shawadinko plant with the tryptophan poisoning. And so, his background was in biochemistry. He was essentially working in the manufacturing industry from a kind of separate addendum. And from that exposure and that incident, he basically made it his lifelong mission to make sure that never happened again. But he also was on his own healing journey, right? And as we see with all the great thought leaders of this industry, usually there's a very personal journey as to why something was brought to the surface. And that goes into our healing philosophy and beyond. But he essentially started to uncover through his just research and ultimately his personal practice with our co-founder, Dr. Linda Forbes, the healing modality, and created the healing modality, quantum reflex analysis, which is a kinesiologic modality, right? But it incorporates TCM, acupuncture meridians, and just bioenergetic healing techniques, and really starts to tap into the real true layer or core layer of what health really entails, right? And so when you're looking in that modality, right, it really taps into the frequency of life and what we want to do and what his mission alongside that was to build a product line that really spoke to the essence of what radiant health and cellular resonant nutrition is all about, right? And so through research from Dr. Albert Fritz Popp in Germany, there's actually new research that you can reference from Michael Levin even, it starts to understand the semi-crystalline cellular matrix, right, of each individual cell, and ultimately providing nourishment at the ideal resonance to each of those cells to unlock their highest vibrational potential, right? That's a core philosophy for what we do here at Premier Research Labs. And that really requires that we have a quality program, right, that is really looking to validate what is cellular resonant nutrition, right? Getting the frequency of that product to be as pure and as potent as possible so that it really can impact and change the cellular physiological principles for a better outcome, right? And I think that's the beautiful thing about life. We talk about it, but each cell has its own ideal programming, right? But what happens in the lives we live is environmental pollutants, toxins, emotional burdens, right? You even can have genetic burdens from past, almost like past lineages, right? Kind of burden on top and limit how that cell actually expresses itself, right? And so a kind of a core facet, right, when we talk about energetic healing is building in frequencies that kind of untangle the knots around the cell to allow it to really exude its highest vibrational potential, right? And that's what we talk about with cellular resonance.
Just to this idea that nutrition has resonance and a vibration. So actually, I went out to Albert Fritz Popp's lab, 15 years ago now,
cool.
when we were filming for the Living Matrix. But so with Albert Fritz Popp, what he was one of the first people to show. He wasn't actually the first, but he was one of the people who took the research further. He basically showed that whether it was an animal, whether it was a leaf or a plant, it would basically emit biophotons. And in general, when something was more lively, it would emit more coherent biophotons. And what Will is basically talking to here, and it's maybe fairly obvious with fresh food. If you pick food, if you go and pick straight out of your garden and juice it, and you've got very vibrant, rich, photonic high resonance food. And in the supplement industry, we've always been it's a little bit funny in the supplement industry because, oh my goodness, maybe 90% of the supplement companies, honestly, it's just all this very, very dead powder or synthetic vitamins, etc. And one of the things that Premier Research Labs has been keen on is to basically preserve as much of that original vibrational essence as they can. And actually, I went to I've been to their offices a couple of times. There's 76 people in quality control, and when they're importing all of the different herbs and ingredients, they're rejecting. I believe you reject 80% of the raw materials that are coming in because they don't meet those high vibrational standards. So that's So if Ness was to ever partner with a nutritional company, it would basically be Premier Research Labs, which is what's happened because of that level of quality. So anyway, yeah. So that's
I think you
explains that a little bit more.
You hit on a really good point, Harry, and I think this is when you talk about how can we empower each individual person to reach their highest vibrational potential, right? Well, we have to look at all the different frequency inputs that are coming into the body, right? And that includes the environment, the home environment, right? What clothes they're wearing on their body, what jewelry they're wearing on their body, the mind, right? What affirmations they're saying, how their subconscious is playing out. But then we start to look at another major macro input into our body that is basically turning over and renewing itself every couple months, right? Your cells are changing all the time. And so, the main key component of that is the food and the water, of course, and the air that you breathe, right? And so when we look at supplement strategies, right, and when we look at the supplement market as a whole, the majority of the market actually has what's called non-nutritive fillers are flow aids to that manufacturing process. They're added there just to help the product actually fit into the capsule. And what most people don't realize is that substance carries a frequency, right? And that ultimately can impact the overall metabolism, the resonance of the body, also can denature the potential of the raw material or bioactive ingredient that you're putting in the product, right? And so our philosophy and what Dr. Marshall found, right, in his, basically his 30-year just expedition and journey with Dr. Linda Forbes, it was that if you have anything that is below what we call premier quality, right, of a supplement offering where you essentially haven't verified and validated the frequency and the potency, the purity, the specificity of that botanical or raw ingredient that you're interested in, right? So you ensure that it's the best of the best, right? It has the highest resonant potential to really, support and drive results. And then you also, if you don't add, or if you add excipients, or if you do add excipients and non-nutritive flow aids to that, even if you have the best product and raw material on the market, right? If you're putting something that's inert, non-nutritive, ultimately could impact the body at some level, you're going to limit the potential of the healing that botanical can provide, right? And really help to reorchestrate the body's, entire physiological mechanisms. And so we as a society, right, and this goes to the foods that we eat and, everything that we consume, whether that's literature and beyond, right? But we want to make sure that we have something that is of purity and of essence to really impact and reattune the body to its natural and most radiant expression, right? And so this is where it's a wonderful partnership with Nest, with the emphyceuticals, because that's pure frequency. And we've always had this philosophy that frequency is a main driver of health outcomes, right? But you have to have a substance behind that to ground the body. And it's like a tuning fork kind of modality, right? You put the frequency in, we want the body to resonate and hold that frequency so that it actually can impact and propagate that frequency throughout the body. And that's kind of a core facet to really our cellular resonant theory in how we approach and how we lecture physicians, is to help to really
You
hold
mean
the
like
body.
that it helps provide like a foundational building block?
Correct. Yeah. And it allows for that frequency, whether
Yeah,
that's.
we used to have a line called Nestrition. Yeah, unfortunately, because all the regulations in Europe kept changing, we had to stop. But there was just anyway, we literally had to change ingredients every year, and we couldn't keep up. But it was sort of that. It was sort of that idea. But basically, we would imprint the nutritionals so that the imprint would basically provide the instructions to the cell of what to do for and then by providing the extra nutritional building blocks, it would help the cells, shape and basically regenerate to the information that we'd imprinted them with. But obviously it's slightly early days, but I believe in 3 to 6 months time, some of Premier Research Labs products will also be imprinted with the NES information, so we can have that similar effect. And then those products obviously will be in the software and the nutrition screen. So that's sort of where that's going. So for you, what is the connection between bioenergetic healing and nutrition?
Yeah. If you're looking for kind of a guiding principle as to why for me at least, that I really sought guidance and an understanding of this whole field of bioenergetics. I have a rich tenure kind of going into the biological sciences as a background. And, one of the core questions that, school never really addressed, and I think this is always very interesting, is it always goes into the hows and the whats, right, of, cellular metabolism and different processes, metabolic processes and beyond, right? So the chemistry and a little bit of the physics, right? But you don't necessarily understand the founding orchestration of why everything works the way it does. What's the ultimately guiding energetic principle? And I like to say energetic principle, but what's the guiding principle of how all of these reactions in the body have a seemingly fluid organization to them, right? And there was always this question of, what's beneath, right? What's the additional layer beneath all these macro and micro molecules that we talk about in regards to chemistry and biology that really helps to really be the conduit of life, right? And so, the joke I always have is I was a big Star Wars fan, right, growing up, and it was like, it must have been the Force, right? It's kind of a joke, right? But the reality is as you start to look at how science is evolving in physics and quantum physics, and with the discovery of biophotons and really the electrical grid of the cell, like I said, Michael Levin's doing some wonderful work to orchestrate and showcase how the cell is organizing these cellular processes. You start to find that, okay, there is this foundational layer of what we would call bioenergetics that is orchestrating all of life's pivotal processes. And so what our goal is with nutrition then is to ensure that those foundational principles, the body's bioenergetic mechanics, right? So what helps to conduct the bioelectrical potential gradients in the cell, what helps to ensure that the coherence of the biophotonic emissions, right, is going to be in line, right? That we're looking at nutritional strategies that really supports that foundation. And it's really not complicated, right? I mean, it's what we're taught in biology class or nutritional sciences, right? But when you start to turn your lens to, okay, well, if we look at what the cell membrane really is, as an example, it's a semi-crystalline matrix, right? It's a phospholipid bilayer that has a hydrophobic and a hydrophilic tails, and it's really orchestrated in an array of almost like a crystalline matrix, which allows that frequency, right? So just like if you strike a glass on the side or you rub a glass with your fingers, it starts to vibrate, right? And it starts to emanate that frequency out throughout the body. And so then we can understand, well, if you have biophotonic emissions coming from the cell, which are essentially electrical emissions, right? They carry and propagate certain different densities of electrical charge, right? And they change the ionic kind of gradient of the cell. Well, once that gets to that cell membrane, that starts to then propagate outwards and influence the health and kind of overall processes of other cells, right? And so then what you start to see is this harmonization of cells based on all these different inputs of each individual cell. And the beauty here is we can start to, with technology and how it's advancing, right, and how we can start to understand the underlying causes of diseases, we can start to pinpoint, okay, what would rebalance that? What would bring those cells back into harmony so that, if you have a certain group of cells basically out of tune, we're starting to retune those to what is their natural and most optimal expression. And that's where nutrition is. It's the tuning instrument, it's the tuning materials, right? It uploads, and it's basically the scaffolding to help that cell have its most ideal expression, right? And so that's kind of the interplay of nutrition, but happy to kind of dive into that further. Does that make sense from your angle?
Yeah, I was just curious, in all your labs and all those testers, do you have a way of like testing that sort of the resonance quality or the extra vibration in your supplements?
Yeah, I mean, when we look around our Premier Quality program, right, it's a whole selection of quality tests that we're doing to basically ensure that frequency is the most ideal that it can be, right, of that raw material, right? So, you think of HPLC, right? You think of gas chromatography, you think of DNA, think of actually, screening for contaminants, right? And so these are more biological, physiological mechanisms that, any lab should be running, right? Any third party. And then what we do is we do an additional bioenergetic test to ensure compliance, right? Which is basically kinesiologic modalities to basically ensure that the body's field's not collapsing on subjects. That's kind of a core principle to our energetic testing, but we're validating all of that with hard science in regards to data around, okay, well, what's the quality of that raw material? And that's purity, potency, specification, identity, and more, right? And we're very adept in writing our own and developing our own specifications, because a lot of what is on the industry are industry standards, right? So they take an herb or a botanical, and it's a frequency of what is grown in California, for example.
You haven't tried out gas discharge, GDV equipment or anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of, not at this time, but I think it's evolving.
It's basically Carillion photography, but you can basically look at the photon emissions from what basically a tiny current is on the plate, and then you can put a different plant material or a supplement, and then you take a photo in a dark room, and you can basically see what's called gas discharge, but you can see the sort of the potency of different things. We should do that. It'd be quite fun.
I agree. Yeah. And I think, just looking, and that's a whole additional layer. You can talk about the oral elements. Apologies, that's the best abbreviation that I can come up with. But, looking at the aura of each individual plant and botanical and really starting to understand from not only, from within the plant, right, but kind of the emission spectrum outside of that, right? And I think that's what's really exciting about our field and where science is evolving. It's looking to understand the quantum implications, right, of everything that we put into our bodies and our life, right? Because there is a fundamental matter proposition that is orchestrating everything that we perceive in our waking consciousness. And so this is the really exciting opportunity, is how science is evolving on the frontier to really measure what really the ancients knew about forever, right? And there was this innate kind of conscious understanding of a greater field, right, that basically lots of different cultures were tapping into previously. I mean, you think about meditation, you think about all these different ancient modalities, right? They're tapping into what we would call source healing principles, that basically when you are aligned, right, emotionally, physically, spiritually, you're tapping into that ideal expression. And so when we think about bioenergetic healing, it's how are we getting back to those roots, right? And of course, offering a scientific validation and a tried and true method, which is very big to our organization, because you have to validate. You can't just rely on a kinesiologic test, right? It can be subjective in certain scenarios. It also, you can have scenarios where that individual testing can be off, right? And there's all these different layers you have to keep in mind of. But the goal ultimately is to build a system that really continually drives to that ideal resonance state for each individual. So it's really exciting.
Could you share some of the research that you've done on your products?
Yeah, I mean, what we do is we do extensive vetting in regards to the claims and how it's impacted basically different cohorts of individuals, right? So, and that's looking more at the botanical level. And then from a formulation perspective, all of our products actually have been in clinical practice for over 30 years. And there's been iterative refinement of those formulations through Dr. Forbes and Dr. Marshall when he was around, to ultimately drive towards better and better results. So, they were being used in a clinical setting, and, for certain scenarios to really support the body to ideal health, there was constant refinement. He was the whole cohort of development in a lot of ways was the lab actually was, the clinic, right? And I think that's a wonderful research paradigm where it's accelerated learning and really looking to drive results to that end patient. Because he was manufacturing it, right, in the back, and he could ultimately adjust based on what he was seeing and what new research ultimately was showing.
So basically started because he had a clinic originally.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Got you.
Yeah. So it all comes in. You look at some of our flagship formulas like our ND products. I mean, those were used clinically to really, and developed clinically. They're, in-house fermentation products of botanicals, which is very novel in the market. But what you get is a bioactivation from the organism, right? The probiotics, to actually attune that raw material to be more effective for supporting health outcomes, right? And from a scientific perspective, right, that's a decrease in stringent factors, anti-nutrient factors, and an increase of polyphenols and other bioactives that ultimately support the herbal or botanical mechanism of action in the body. So, and that's tried. I mean, it's novel, right? It makes sense, but it makes sense at the same time, right? Fermentation's been used for years, but you don't see a lot of fermentation or fermented products on the market. So that's one of those advances that, came from clinical application and understanding when an individual ultimately can't digest, can't assimilate. Well, how can we ultimately, from a scientific angle, improve that, right? And that's from the research of fermentation. So,
where do you see the future of bioenergetics and nutrition going?
Well, I would say, and maybe we can spar on a little bit of this, but it's a constant involvement to really, I would say, a frequency-based medicine approach, right? I think, ultimately there will be an understanding of how the body's biology can be changed based on the attunement that is put into the body. And like I really kind of said at the beginning, nutrition and, almost the feeding principles of the individual will be so grounded in ideal expression that that personalized nutrition segment will be of personalized bioenergetic healing, right? And really aligning that frequency input and the nutrition to ensure that each individual person has their most ideal expression and outcome. I can imagine devices, personally, that people are wearing to help calibrate the body and understand, even, from a micro input space, what may need to be changed to help to support biological processes. I mean, you think of how wearables are changing, and I know y'all are doing some wearable innovation as well in the Energy for Life space. And I think it's very exciting because as people start to get more inputs and understand from that frequency space and their whole ecosystem of the body, they really can make day-to-day, if not hour-by-hour, lifestyle changes and dietary changes to drive home.
Yeah, it's something we're building in. And obviously, we already have our voice scan, the wearables coming out relatively soon, or in a few months' time. But within your phone, there's basically like an auto coaching app that's taking the voice data, taking the wearable data, and then it's guiding your day-to-day habits. And I've looked at some sensors that look at they use light for looking at vitamins and minerals in your body, but I'm not totally honestly sure it's accurate. So I'm wanting to get that verified in a lab. But I think, yeah, over time, I can imagine you're going to have wearables that are going to look at your cellular nutrition and say well, yeah, if you're deficient in selenium, have some more oysters today, etc.
Exactly. And I mean, it's really cool because, I mean, really, in a lot of ways, you can measure bioenergetics and health and healing just by the reflection of the photonic emissions back, right? And so, we just have to evolve from a technology basis in a lot of ways to start to measure from an inputs spectrum, visible light data and also non-visible light data that can really help us to better understand how the body is performing, right? And so, I think we're not too far away. I mean, you think of how current like HRV and other technologies are run. I mean, it's diodes, right, on the wrist going into the skin to measure those changes. We just have to develop other forms of emissions that can then be reflected back into a sensor to ultimately change or ultimately give an output that is actionable on, right? And so I think that's really exciting, and it doesn't require, when you think about quantum healing and you think of bioenergetics, it sounds really intense, right? When I first started here at Premier Research Labs, my mind was like blown. I was like, what does this all mean? But when you really look at, everything, and this is the beauty of physics and biology, everything has a very simple unit of measure, right? We just have to grow our technology to be more efficient at measuring that very simple unit so that we can then understand, okay, what needs to be changed? What can we change? And I think that's the exciting advancement of technology, and all the work you're doing with Ness, with the voice scans and wearables and beyond, is in that same direction. So we're honored to be a part of that journey with you.
Perfect. Are there any last minute but things you would like to say to the audience? I mean, obviously there's going to premierresearchlabs.com. Although, I mean, it's honestly easier if you're a Nest customer, you can see it in the software, so that's pretty easy.
Yeah, I mean, feel free, our partnership's coming very soon. This will hopefully be the first of several entries just talking about, maybe strategies and bioenergetic healing and beyond. But, we will be featured on Nest shortly. And then you can always check out Premier Research Labs for additional questions and our offering to our health professional network and their clients. I always like to leave with a couple words of wisdom as it pertains to practical approaches to bioenergetic healing and really helping to support the body's, health outcomes. And, one of the easiest things you can do is, prioritize cell membrane health, right? And what we talk about in that direction is omega-3 and fatty acid index within the entire body, right? So prioritize those healthy fats, ensure that, you are getting enough fat, right, in the diet, because that cell membrane is ultimately the tuning fork for the rest of the body, right? So if you have one faulty cell membrane in an organ gland system, that ultimately can cause a cascade of, dysfunctional communication, right? So, prioritizing that, prioritizing the alkalinity of the body, right? Ensuring appropriate mineral balance. That's going to help ultimately drive the coherence and the messaging of that biophotonic load through the entire body as well. So those are two very simple steps. Looking at digestive health would be kind of the third. But like I said, bioenergetic health and prioritizing bioenergetic health in the body does not have to be rocket science, right? It's still the foundational nutrition strategies that a lot of individuals lecture on. They just use a different vernacular, and they don't realize that they're actually supporting the matrix of life and recommending those products or supplement options. So
perfect. Well, yeah, thank you very much. And also, Will and Premier Research Labs will be at Zenergy, so you'll be able to meet him and other members from Premier Research Labs there. And yeah, we look forward to a fruitful partnership, and obviously check it all out in the BWS software. So, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Harry, and thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode and any of the other episodes in the Zenergy series, remember, you can hear from all of the speakers in these episodes live at Zenergy in Denver, October 3rd to the 5th. All you have to do is purchase your ticket at zenergy2024.com. I really look forward to meeting you in person.